Good evening, and welcome. This is a long, gentle story told slowly with soft details for listening as you rest. It is a story about the Inca people, about their mountains, their daily lives, their temples, and their gold. The words will not hurry. They will move steadily, like footsteps on a stone path, like water flowing in a channel. You may listen closely, or you may let the words drift past as your eyes grow heavy. There is no need to stay awake to the end. The story will continue, whether you follow each detail or simply rest in the rhythm of the voice. The story of the Inca gold does not begin with treasure. It begins with the land. High in South America, the Andes Mountains stretch for thousands of miles, their peaks covered in snow, their valleys green and fertile. The air is thin and clear, and the sky feels close, as if the clouds rest on the shoulders of the mountains. This was the home of the Inca people, a world of terraces, stone walls, llamas, and winding rivers. Morning in the Andes was quiet. The sun rose slowly over the ridges, lighting one slope, then another, until the valleys glowed with soft golden light. Villages stirred into life at a steady pace. There was no rush. People stepped outside their stone houses, tied their sandals, and began their daily work. Some carried woven baskets to the fields. Others tended to animals, and children helped their families in simple, repeated tasks. The Andes were not gentle, but they were steady. The mountains required patience. The Incas learned how to carve terraces into steep hillsides, turning slopes into steppes of farmland. Each step held maize, potatoes, or quinoa, watered by channels that carried fresh mountain streams. Day after day, the work continued in quiet rhythm. Stones placed on stones, seeds planted in rows, hands repeating the same motions. Farming was not hurried. It was measured, like breathing. The houses were made of stone too, fitted carefully without mortar, each rock pressed against another until the walls stood firm. That was the way of the Inca. To place one thing beside another, carefully, repeatedly, until strength was found in the whole. A doorway was shaped, a roof laid with thatch, and the home became part of the landscape, as if it had always been there. Life was arranged in order. Families worked together, communities shared their harvests, and labor was divided so that no one was entirely alone. Men carried loads along stone roads. Women spun yarn from alpaca wool, weaving it into cloth that carried patterns of meaning. The colors were soft but strong, reds, yellows, browns, each dye taken from earth or plant. Woven again and again, the same threads crossed one another until a pattern emerged, steady and calm. Llamas walked the paths as well. They carried burdens on their backs, sure-footed on the mountain trails. Their bells tinkled softly, a sound that mingled with the wind. When they rested, they chewed grass slowly, their movements unhurried. To the Incas, llamas were companions and workers alike, steady presences in the high valleys. And through it all, the mountains stood silent. The snow melted into rivers. The rivers fed the terraces, and the terraces fed the people. It was a cycle, repeated year after year, as constant as the rhythm of footsteps on a stone path. At the center of this life was not gold, not yet. At the center was the sun. The Incas raised their faces each morning to the light, warm and steady, the source of growth and life. They believed the sun was their ancestor, their guide, the giver of warmth to the cold mountains. Gold would come to matter because it reflected that light. But in these early mornings, it was simply the sun itself that mattered. Imagine then, walking through such a village. The air is cool. Smoke curls from a small fire. You hear the scraping of a stone against another as someone sharpens a tool. You hear the crunch of footsteps on the path. You see fields in neat terraces, green rows climbing the hillsides like stairways to the sky. Nothing is hurried. Each movement is measured. Each sound is soft. At night, the stars filled the sky. The thin air of the Andes made them sharp and countless, spilling across the heavens in white rivers of light. Families gathered around small fires. They told stories of their ancestors, of the gods who shaped the mountains and the rivers. The crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices, the cold air pressing against the warmth of woolen blankets. All of this was part of the rhythm of life. The Incas were not a people of gold in their daily living. Their wealth was in the land, in the crops, in the roads that tied their empire together. They built long highways of stone, stretching across mountains and valleys. Messengers ran these roads, carrying messages from one end of the empire to another. Each runner passed a small bundle, a quipu of knotted cords to the next runner. Knots told stories, knots recorded numbers. A thread, a knot, another thread, another knot. A calm record, precise and quiet, but still the gold was there. It glimmered in temples. It decorated statues. It shone on the faces of the gods. To the Incas, it was not money, but light. It was the sun made solid. They did not hoard it. They displayed it, letting it shine where all could see. Gold was sacred, and it was treated as such. For now, though, in this first chapter, the treasure rests in the background. What matters more is the scene, the mountains, the rivers, the terraces, the daily life. Gold will come into the story later, when strangers arrive, when demands are made, when legends are born. But for now, we linger in the quiet Andes, where the Incas wake each morning to the slow rhythm of life. The Andes still hold that silence. Even today, the terraces remain, carved into the mountainsides, step after step, a memory of the hands that shaped them. Even today, the stones of Cusco stand, fitted so carefully that centuries of earthquakes have not broken them. The work of the Incas endures because it was built slowly, carefully, patiently. So the story begins with quiet, with the Andes rising, with rivers flowing, with villagers stepping softly onto their paths. The gold is waiting, but it is not yet sought. It lies in the temples, in the ornaments, in the stories yet to be told. For now, we breathe with the mountains. We rest with the people. We notice the stone, the thread, the bell of a llama, the warmth of the sun. This is the beginning, a calm beginning, in a world that moved slowly, in a world where treasure was not yet taken, but simply part of the light. The story of the Inca gold is also the story of the people who lived among the mountains. To understand the treasure, we must first understand the life that surrounded it. The Inca Empire stretched far across the Andes. Villages clung to slopes, cities rose on ridges, and roads tied them all together. Each part of the land had its use, and each person had a role. There was balance, like the balance of terraces stepping upward on the hillsides. Life began with the morning. A farmer might wake in a stone house with a thatched roof, the smoke from a cooking fire drifting through the air. He would tie his sandals, lift a woven basket, and walk the path toward the terraces. The fields were carved into steps, neat and orderly. Each step held maize, potatoes, or quinoa. Water flowed through channels guided from mountain streams. The farmer bent low, planting, weeding, repeating the motions he had learned from his father and that his children would learn from him. In the next field, another family did the same. Day after day, season after season, the work was shared. One household might grow potatoes, another might raise llamas, another might weave cloth. Together, they supported one another, their lives woven together like threads in a blanket. Weaving was one of the most constant tasks. Women sat in courtyards stretching yarn made from alpaca wool across wooden frames. With patient hands, they crossed one thread over another again and again until a pattern appeared. The patterns carried meaning: zigzags for mountains, diamonds for the sun, lines for rivers. The cloths were warm, colorful, and useful, but they were also full of symbols, reminders of the land and the gods. A single blanket might take weeks or months to complete, yet the work never hurried. Each thread was placed as it needed to be, one after another. Children helped in small ways. They carried water. They gathered firewood. They chased llamas and guinea pigs, laughing softly. At night, they listened to the stories of their elders. In this way, the rhythms of life were passed on, not through books, but through living and remembering. The Incas had no written alphabet, but they had quipus, cords with knots tied in them. A messenger might carry a bundle of cords along the long roads of the empire. Each knot represented numbers, tallies of food, records of work. The cords hung together, silent but precise. When the messenger arrived, he passed the quipu to another, and the journey continued. A message could travel hundreds of miles, knot by knot, runner by runner, each part of the chain repeating the same steady effort. Festivals were another part of the rhythm of Inca life. In the plazas of Cusco or in village squares, people gathered for music, dance, and offerings. Flutes and drums sounded in slow, repeating patterns. Dancers lifted their arms to the sun, moving in circles. Offerings of maize beer were poured to the earth, a gift to Pachamama, the mother of the land. There was joy in these gatherings, but even joy followed a steady pattern, like the turning of the seasons. The Incas believed in many gods, but the sun was the greatest. Each morning, people lifted their eyes to the rising light. Each evening, they watched it descend behind the mountains. The sun gave warmth to the terraces and ripened the crops. Gold, in their eyes, was not money, but the very reflection of the sun's gift. When they polished a golden cup or hammered a sheet of gold to cover a temple wall, they believed they were holding the sun itself in their hands. In daily life, gold did not buy food or clothing. Barter and labor exchanged those things. A farmer might trade maize for cloth or potatoes for salt. A weaver might exchange a blanket for dried fish carried from the coast. Value was found in usefulness, not in coins. And yet the presence of gold was never far away. It appeared in festivals, in ceremonies, in the decorations of sacred spaces. The roads of the Inca Empire carried all these elements: food, cloth, animals, messages, and people. They were built with stone, stretching for thousands of miles. Some climbed high passes where the air was thin. Others descended to valleys where rivers ran. Rope bridges spanned gorges, swaying gently as travelers crossed. Along the roads were tambos, small resting places where food and water can be found. Step by step, mile by mile, the empire was connected, not quickly, but reliably. In the towns, markets bustled with quiet trade. Baskets of maize, peppers, beans, and potatoes sat in rows. Wool, cloth, tools, and ornaments were displayed carefully. People moved among the stalls, not with haste, but with the steady motion of those who knew their place and their neighbors. A market was more than trade. It was also community, a place to meet, to speak, to share news. At home, families gathered in the evenings. Meals were simple: maize porridge, roasted potatoes, sometimes meat. Clay pots simmered over small fires. Children leaned against their parents and elders told stories. The flames flickered, shadows moved across the walls, and voices carried memories of ancestors. These moments were as important as the grand ceremonies of the temples, for they kept the people connected, generation to generation. The Inca rulers lived differently, of course. In Cusco, the capital, the emperor, the Sapa Inca, lived in palaces of stone. Their walls fitted so perfectly that even a knife blade could not slip between the blocks. Courtyards held fountains, gardens displayed flowers, and the rooms were adorned with golden ornaments. Servants carried food, musicians played softly, and the ruler was treated as the child of the sun itself. Yet even here, in the heart of power, the rhythm of daily life was steady. Decisions were made, records kept, rituals performed, all in the same calm repetition found in the villages. So, life in the Inca Empire was not a life of chaos or hurry. It was a life of patterns, terraces carved in repeating steps, cloth woven in repeating designs, roads stretching in repeating lines. It was a life of community where each person's work joined the work of others, creating a whole that was strong and enduring. And within this life, gold glimmered. It was present in temples, in ornaments, in the hands of priests. It was sacred, not because it was rare, but because it caught the light. To the Incas, gold was not wealth, but radiance, a reminder of their connection to the sun. This belief would shape their history, and it would shape the legends that followed. For now, though, we simply notice the life itself, the terraces, the weaving, the markets, the festivals, the quiet evenings by the fire. We notice the rhythm of farming, of spinning, of trading, of walking the stone roads. We see the empire not as treasure hunters later imagined it, but as a living place, filled with steady, ordinary details. This was the foundation on which the story of Inca gold rested. A life of balance, a life of patience, a life arranged in patterns as enduring as the mountains themselves. To the Inca, gold was not simply a metal. It was not counted in coins, it was not measured in trade, and it was not stored away in vaults. Gold was something higher, something closer to the sky. They called it the sweat of the sun. They saw it as the earth's way of reflecting light back to the heavens. When gold shone, it was not wealth, it was radiance. Imagine an Inca priest standing before a temple wall. The wall is lined with hammered sheets of gold, each one fitted carefully beside the next. As the sun rises, its rays strike the surface. The wall glows, not in sharp brightness, but in a warm, steady gleam. The priest lifts his face to the light, seeing not just metal, but the presence of the sun itself. Gold adorned the temples. In Cusco, the Coricancha, the temple of the sun, was covered in it. Plates of gold lined its walls. Inside, statues of llamas, of maize stalks, of human figures were fashioned from the metal. Each object carried meaning. The llama, the bringer of wool and burden. The maize, the source of food and life. The figures, a reflection of the people themselves. All of them remade in gold, shining as offerings to Inti, the sun god. In ceremonies, golden vessels held sacred drinks. Golden discs reflected firelight. Ornaments gleamed in the hair and clothing of priests and nobles. The use was not casual. Each item was crafted with care, then used in ritual, then returned to its place. The hands that shaped the gold did so patiently, hammering gently, smoothing the surface again and again, until it reflected light without flaw. For the common people, gold was less present, yet still part of the imagination. They did not use it in trade, but they knew it adorned their temples. They saw it during festivals, when golden objects were displayed. They heard stories of its power, of its sacred nature. Gold was not part of daily survival, but it was part of daily awareness. It existed in the background, like the mountains themselves, always present, always significant, always beyond the reach of ordinary need. The artisans who worked gold were respected. They sat in quiet workshops, shaping the soft metal with tools of stone and bronze. They heated it, they hammered it, they polished it. They turned it into thin sheets that covered walls, or into delicate ornaments that shone in firelight. Their work was not hurried, for the meaning of the object was not in speed, but in care. Each hammer strike was steady. Each polish was deliberate. When finished, the object carried not only the glow of gold, but the patience of the maker. Gold was also tied to myths. The Incas believed their first rulers, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, were children of the sun. They carried with them a golden staff that guided them to the valley where Cusco would be founded. When the staff sank easily into the earth, they knew it was the chosen place. From that point onward, gold was connected to origin, to destiny, to the very foundation of their world. To those outside the empire, gold might be seen as wealth. To the Incas, it was closer to a prayer. It was an offering, a reminder, a symbol. It belonged to the gods first, and only second to the people. That is why so much of it was given to temples, to shrines, to sacred places. The mountains were dotted with huacas, or holy sites, each one receiving offerings. Sometimes it was food, sometimes it was cloth, sometimes it was gold. Each offering was a gesture of respect, a way of keeping harmony with the world. The Coricancha was the center of it all. Its name meant golden enclosure. Travelers who saw it described walls that gleamed like sunrise, rooms that held golden altars, gardens filled with golden plants. Imagine a maize field, not of green stalks, but of golden ones. Imagine llamas not of wool and flesh, but of solid metal, standing still, yet shining with meaning. These were not decorations in the modern sense. They were prayers made visible, sacred symbols given form. Outside the empire, people might have measured wealth by silver coins or by land. The Incas measured differently. They saw wealth in harvests, in roads, in the health of their people. Gold, though beautiful, was not part of exchange. It was set apart. That separation gave it mystery, and that mystery gave it power. When the sun set, golden ornaments caught the last light. They glowed softly, holding the warmth for a few moments more. In the firelight of evening, they shone again, reflecting the flames. To sit in such a space was to feel surrounded by light. Light from the sky. Light from fire. Light from the sacred metal itself. The connection between gold and the sun was so strong that even words echoed it. Gold was not described as mine or yours, but as belonging to the divine. People might carry it, shape it, polish it, but it was not owned in the modern sense. It was always, in a way, borrowed from the sun. And so, the meaning of gold in the Inca world was calm, steady, sacred. It was not rushed, not hoarded, not sold. It was displayed. It was honored. It was used in rituals that tied the people to their gods. This meaning would later be misunderstood. When strangers came across the sea, they would see gold as money, as wealth, as something to be seized and carried away. But before that time, before the clash of worlds, gold was a quiet presence in the lives of the Incas. It shone in temples. It appeared in myths. It reflected the sun. It is worth pausing here to rest in that meaning, to see the gold not as treasure, but as light. to notice the way it caught the sun's rays, to imagine the steady glow of a temple wall, to feel the patience of a craftsman's hand as he hammered a sheet until it was thin and bright. Gold was not the beginning of the Inca world, but it was its reflection. It was not their daily bread, but it was their daily prayer. It shone in silence, waiting until the day when others would see it differently. For now, it remains in our story as it was then, sacred, shining, steady. The Inca world was not only made of terraces and fields, it was also shaped by temples, places where the ordinary and the sacred touched. Among these, none was greater than the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, in Cusco. Imagine approaching the temple. Its walls are stone, but not plain stone. Sheets of gold have been hammered thin and set against the surface. In the morning light, they glow warmly, as though the sun itself has settled upon the earth. Travelers entering Cusco might see this glow from afar, a steady shimmer in the heart of the city. Inside, the rooms were arranged with care. At the center stood an altar dedicated to Inti, the sun god. Upon this altar rested a great disk of gold, polished until it caught every ray of sunlight. When the first light of dawn entered the temple, it touched this disk, and the whole chamber glowed. The people believed that Inti himself had arrived, present in the radiance. Around the main altar were smaller chambers, each dedicated to other gods and forces of nature. One held images of the moon, silver and calm. Another held stars, carefully arranged symbols of the night. Another honored thunder and lightning. Each space had its own offerings, its own decorations, its own quiet glow. Together, the chambers formed a circle of balance, reflecting the harmony of the world. Ceremonies took place in these temples. Priests dressed in fine cloth and wearing ornaments of gold performed rituals at dawn and dusk. They lifted golden vessels filled with sacred chicha, a drink made from maize. They poured some to the ground, a gift to Pachamama, the Mother Earth. They lifted some to the sky, a gift to Inti. The acts were repeated day after day, season after season, until they became part of the rhythm of life. The people gathered outside during festivals. Music echoed through the plazas. Flutes made of bone or cane played soft high notes. Drums made of wood and hide kept a slow, steady beat. Dancers moved in circles, their arms raised toward the sky. The movements were not hurried. They were deliberate, each step a reminder of the connection between people and gods. Offerings filled the ceremonies. Food, cloth, and gold were placed before the altars. Sometimes, small statues of llamas made of gold or silver were presented. Sometimes, golden vessels filled with maize beer were given. Each gift was a way of maintaining balance, of honoring the forces that made life possible. The temple walls themselves were part of the ceremony. The stones had been cut and fitted so precisely that they seemed to breathe with the earth. No mortar held them, yet they stood firm through earthquakes and storms. To walk among them was to feel the weight of time, the patience of countless hands that had shaped and placed each block. The Coricancha was not the only temple. Across the empire, in valleys, on mountaintops, by rivers, huacas were found. A huaca was a sacred place, sometimes a stone, sometimes a spring, sometimes a mountain peak. People believed spirits lived in these places. Offerings were left there too. Food, cloth, gold, whatever could be spared. Each huaca was part of the great network of the sacred, spread like threads across the land. Pilgrimages took place along the roads. People walked for days to reach a temple or huaca. They carried their offerings in woven bags, step after step, until they arrived. When they reached the site, they rested, they prayed, they gave their gifts, and then they began the long walk home. These journeys were not rushed. They were steady, part of the rhythm of the year, reminders of belonging. At Cusco, during great festivals, the emperor himself appeared. The Sapa Inca was considered the child of the sun. He wore garments woven with patterns of power. He wore ornaments of gold that caught the light. When he stood before the people, it was as though the sun had taken human form. The crowd watched in silence, then in song, then in dance. The presence of the ruler was part of the ritual, part of the order that kept the empire steady. Temples were also schools of memory. Priests taught young novices the rituals, the songs, the timing of ceremonies. They learned the prayers, the gestures, the meanings of the offerings. Each detail was passed down carefully so that nothing would be forgotten. Knowledge did not live in books. It lived in people, in repetition, in memory. The use of gold in these ceremonies was constant, yet never careless. It was shaped into discs, cups, plates, and statues, but always with purpose. A golden sun disk was not decoration. It was the presence of Inti. A golden llama was not ornament. It was a prayer for strength and plenty. A golden cup was not luxury. It was a vessel for offerings. Each piece carried weight beyond its form. At night, when the fires burned in the courtyards, the gold glowed softly in the flickering light. Priests moved slowly among the shadows, carrying out their rituals, repeating words that had been spoken for generations. Outside, families watched the stars, seeing in them the same gods honored inside the temple. The sacred and the ordinary were not separate. They were woven together, like threads in the same cloth. So the temples and ceremonies of the Inca world were not loud or hurried. They were steady, repetitive, patient. They bound the people to the gods to the earth to the people. Gold played its part as light made solid, always reflecting, always reminding. The story of Inca gold cannot be told without these temples, for it was here that the gold found its true meaning, not as treasure hidden in chests, not as coins to be counted, but as offerings, as light, as symbols. The temples held the gold, the priests tended it, the ceremonies gave it purpose. Later, when strangers arrived and saw these golden walls and ornaments, they would see them differently. They would see wealth, not worship. They would see fortune, not faith. But before that misunderstanding, before the clash of worlds, the temples stood quietly, glowing in the sun, echoing with flutes and drums, steady with rituals repeated year after year. To imagine the Inca gold, we must imagine these spaces. We must walk slowly into the Coricancha. We must see the golden walls, the glowing disc, the careful offerings. We must hear the slow beat of the drum, the steady notes of the flute, the chants rising and falling in rhythm. We must feel the stone beneath our feet, the light upon our faces, the patience of centuries in the air. This is where the meaning of gold lived before it was taken away. This is where light became metal, and metal became prayer. Far across the ocean, another world was stirring. In Spain, ships had already carried men to distant lands across seas that seemed endless. Wooden vessels with tall masts and white sails moved slowly westward, driven by wind and tide. The men on board stood on wooden decks, listening to the creak of ropes, the splash of water, and the low calls of sailors. For weeks, sometimes months, they lived with the rhythm of the sea. Each day brought the same sounds, the same sights, the same endless horizon. When these ships reached the coasts of South America, they brought with them not only men but intentions. They carried crosses, swords, muskets, and also hunger for wealth. Stories had already reached their ears, stories of golden cities, of temples covered in shining metal, of kings who lived surrounded by treasure. To European eyes, gold was not sacred. It was fortune, it was power, trade, armies, and crowns. What the Inca saw as light, the strangers saw as money. The first contacts between Spaniards and Incas were hesitant. Messengers approached with care, bearing words of greeting, gifts of food, woven cloth. The strangers answered with beads, small mirrors, and trinkets. To the Incas, these objects seemed curious but not powerful. To the Spaniards, the Inca gifts of cloth and food were welcome. But what caught their attention most was the gold. Even a small ornament was enough to make them believe the stories of wealth were true. As the Spanish moved inland, they saw the roads of the Inca. Stone highways stretched across valleys and up mountain slopes. They marveled at the bridges that swayed above gorges, the terraces cut into mountainsides, the careful organization of the empire. They noted the towns, the storehouses, the markets, and above all, the temples. And in those temples, they saw the glow of gold. The meeting of these two worlds was not loud at first. It was cautious, full of watching and waiting. The Incas observed the strangers with curiosity, noting their clothing of wool and iron, their animals unlike any they had known. Horses carried men swiftly, higher and faster than llamas. The sound of hooves echoed strangely in the plazas. Muskets cracked with sharp noise, unlike the steady beat of drums. Dogs barked at their sides, trained for war. The Spaniards, in turn, observed the Inca order. They saw fields of maize stretching in terraces, storehouses filled with potatoes, towns arranged in neat lines. They saw crowds of people in plazas, listening to their leaders, obeying the words of priests. They saw an empire rich not only in metals, but in food, in cloth, in labor. To them, it was an empire ready to be claimed. The Spanish had come with leaders who already dreamed of conquest. Francisco Pizarro was among them, a man hardened by years at sea and in battle. He listened to the stories of Inca gold, and each retelling seemed more possible when he saw a small ornament, a golden vessel, a polished plate. He believed that if such pieces were common, then greater treasures must be waiting deeper within the empire. The Incas, for their part, did not yet see the danger. They welcomed the visitors with formal rituals, as they would any newcomers. Gifts were exchanged, food was shared, words of peace were spoken. The Spaniards watched carefully, but their eyes returned always to the gold. In every temple they entered, they looked not at the prayers, not at the offerings of food or cloth, but at the walls, the ornaments, the sacred metal shining in the light. The meeting of Atahualpa, the Inca ruler, with Pizarro would come later, but even before that day, the pattern was set. The Incas gave with a spirit of balance. The Spaniards received with a spirit of hunger. Each gesture of respect was misunderstood. Each ornament shown in ritual was remembered as wealth to be seized. The Spanish arrival also brought changes less visible, but just as steady. Diseases unknown to the Andes traveled with them, sicknesses that spread quietly, weakening villages before battles even began. The Incas saw people fall ill without reason, without clear cause, and it unsettled the balance they had long maintained. Still, life in the empire continued, for the moment. Farmers rose to tend their terraces. Weavers sat at their looms, crossing threads. Priests offered gifts to the sun. Festivals filled plazas with music and dance. And among these steady rhythms, strangers moved, watching, noting, imagining what might be taken. The sea still lay behind them. The ships that had carried them across the waves rested in harbors, waiting. But the Spaniards did not intend to return empty-handed. They believed their journey would end not with cloth or food, but with gold carried in chests, gold melted into bars, gold sent back across the ocean to fill the coffers of kings. The Incas could not yet imagine this. To them, gold was still light, still sacred, still part of the sun. To see it as coin, as payment, as profit, was beyond their view. They saw visitors who were strange, but they did not yet see conquerors. The days passed quietly. The Spaniards moved deeper into the land. The Incas offered food and guidance. Each side watched the other, but for different reasons. The Inca people watched to learn. The Spaniards watched to measure what might be taken. In this way, the arrival was not marked by a single loud moment, but by a slow unfolding. Like the steady steps of a messenger on the road, it carried forward one stage at a time. First greetings, then gifts, then questions, then plans. The rhythm was quiet, but beneath it was tension, growing with each passing day. The story of the Inca gold was now turning. For centuries it had shone in temples as prayer, as offering, as light. Now it was being seen by new eyes, eyes that measured it differently. The gold that once reflected the sun would soon be melted, carried, counted. But in this chapter, we pause at the point where the two worlds first touched, one seeing radiance, the other seeing fortune. The Andes still stood, the rivers still flowed, the terraces still fed the people. Yet now, along those stone roads, men walked who had crossed an ocean, men whose thoughts were already set upon treasure. The quiet before the storm stretched on, filled with cautious greetings, with gifts exchanged, with the glimmer of gold shining between two worlds. The story of Inca gold cannot be told without the moment when gold was gathered in a single room piece by piece, to meet a demand that was unlike anything the Incas had known before. It was the ransom of Atahualpa, the emperor, taken by strangers who measured the world not in terraces or rituals, but in treasure. Atahualpa had met the Spaniards at Cajamarca. The meeting began with words, then quickly changed. The Spaniards, with their horses, their muskets, and their swords, seized the Inca ruler. It was sudden, and it was confusing to those who watched. One moment the emperor stood in dignity. The next he was surrounded, held captive by men from across the sea. For the Incas, the ruler was the child of the sun. To see him taken was a shock, but also a puzzle. How could such an act fit into the order of the world? How could the balance be broken in this way? To the Spaniards, it was strategy. To the Incas, it was a disruption of harmony. Atahualpa, held in a chamber, made an offer. He stretched out his hand toward the wall and promised that the room in which he stood would be filled with gold. Not a chest, not a basket, but the entire chamber. He marked the height with his hand, a line as high as a man could reach. To that line, he said, the room would be filled with golden objects. In addition, 2 more rooms would be filled with silver. The Spaniards listened, and they agreed. To them, it was an unimaginable promise, a river of wealth flowing into their hands. To Atahualpa, it was a way to restore balance, to purchase freedom, to give what was sacred in exchange for peace. And so the gathering began. From across the empire, golden objects were brought to Cajamarca. Couriers carried messages. Priests removed ornaments from temples. Artisans unfastened sheets of gold from walls. Statues of llamas, discs of the sun, vessels used in ceremonies, all were carried along the road step by step toward the chamber. Imagine the scene as the objects arrived. Llamas carried loads wrapped in cloth. Men lifted bundles on their backs. Day after day they came, walking slowly into the town, guided by messengers and soldiers. Inside the chamber, the collection grew. First a cup, then a plate, then a disc, then a statue. One object beside another until the floor was covered, then the walls were stacked, piece upon piece. The Spaniards watched as the chamber filled. They measured the progress, noting each delivery, counting each treasure. They saw wealth where the Incas saw offerings. They saw fortune where the Incas saw sacred gifts. Each object was stripped of its meaning in one set of eyes, while still holding meaning in another. The Incas who carried the gold did so quietly. For them, each piece had been made with care, used in ritual, touched by light. To remove it was painful, yet the command of the emperor was law. If filling a chamber with gold would restore him, then the sacrifice must be made. Step after step, offering after offering, they gave what had been sacred for generations. Inside the chamber, the piles rose higher. Plates were stacked against walls. Ornaments were gathered in baskets. Sheets of gold leaned against stone. The line that Atahualpa had marked was slowly reached. The room became heavy with the glow of gold, not displayed as it once was, but crowded together, pressed into a promise. At night, the chamber was silent. The golden objects caught the flicker of torches, reflecting light in 100 directions. The Spaniards walked among them, their shadows stretching long across the walls. For them, it was proof that fortune was real, that the land indeed held treasures beyond imagining. For the Incas, it was a wound, a breaking of balance, a giving up of the sun's gifts. Still, the gathering continued. Silver came as well, filling 2 other rooms, bright and pale beside the golden glow. Vessels, ornaments, sheets, all carried from distant places. Roads that once bore food and cloth now bore treasure, moving toward Cajamarca, toward the chamber where the ruler waited. The ransom was unlike anything the Andes had seen. Never before had so much gold been gathered in one place, not for ritual, not for festival, but for bargain. It was a moment when 2 views of the world met, one of gold as sacred light, one of gold as wealth to be seized. In the quiet of the chamber, the golden objects rested. They carried the memory of temples, of festivals, of prayers. Now they carried also the weight of ransom. The line on the wall had been reached. The promise had been fulfilled. The room glowed with the work of generations, with the offerings of an empire, with the light of the sun made solid. And yet, the balance was not restored. The Spaniards did not release Atahualpa even when the chamber was full. They saw the treasure, they claimed it, and still they held him. For the Incas, it was betrayal. For the Spaniards, it was conquest. The gold that had been sacred was now melted, divided, shipped across the sea. This chapter of the story is heavy with meaning. It shows how differently gold was seen, how one culture offered it in hope, while another demanded it in hunger. It shows how the same metal can shine with prayer in one hand and with greed in another. The ransom of Atahualpa was not only an exchange of objects, it was an exchange of meanings. The room filled with gold was also a room filled with misunderstanding, with mistrust, with the weight of 2 worlds unable to see one another clearly. When we imagine that chamber, we should pause. We should see not only the piles of treasure, but the quiet hands that carried them, the long roads that bore them, the temples left bare. We should hear the silence of the room at night, the flicker of torchlight on golden walls, the steady breathing of men who thought of freedom, and men who thought of fortune. This was the ransom, a moment when the story of Inca gold shifted forever. What had been sacred became seized. What had been light became melted bars. And what had been offered in faith became a prize of conquest. When the ransom of Atahualpa was gathered, it was not the end of the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. For even as one chamber filled with gold, other treasures began to vanish. Some were carried away, melted, and divided. Others were hidden, removed from sight, placed where they could not be taken. This disappearance, slow and steady, gave birth to legends that would echo for centuries. The Inca people knew their land. They knew the valleys, the caves, the rivers, and the mountains. They knew where paths twisted into forests and where stones could be piled to conceal an opening. When the Spaniards pressed for more gold, some treasures were quietly taken away. Priests and guardians carried objects under cover of night. Golden statues, discs, and ornaments were hidden in places sacred and secret. One story speaks of Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, its waters wide and calm. It was said that when news of Spanish hunger spread, priests carried golden objects to the edge of the lake. In the darkness, they lowered them into the water, letting the ripples swallow them. The treasures sank slowly, resting at the bottom, safe from foreign hands. Even now, people wonder if they still lie there, beneath the cold surface, hidden from view. Another story tells of the Langanates Mountains, wild and difficult to cross. Here, the treasure of Atahualpa was said to have been carried when the Spaniards demanded more. Men loaded with ornaments and plates walked the steep paths, guided by leaders who knew the hidden routes. When they reached a place deep in the mountains, they dug pits, they filled caves, they built walls of stone. The treasure was left behind, sealed away in silence. To this day, explorers have searched those mountains hoping to find the lost hoard. None have succeeded. The mountains hold their secrets tightly. Some say tunnels connected Cusco to distant valleys. In these underground paths, gold was carried and hidden. The tunnels were dark, narrow, and long. Those who knew them could move unseen, carrying objects that glowed even in torchlight. When the passages were sealed, the gold was sealed with them. Generations later, whispers of these tunnels remain, but their entrances are gone, or hidden, or forgotten. The Spaniards believed the Incas were hiding treasure, and they pressed harder. They demanded more, they searched more, they melted more of what they found. But always the sense remained that much had been taken away, placed beyond their reach. This tension gave rise to stories, to maps half-drawn, to directions whispered, treasure hidden in lakes, treasure buried in mountains, treasure lost in forests. To the Incas, these actions were not about greed, they were about protection. Gold was sacred, it belonged to the gods. To give too much of it away, to let it all fall into foreign hands, was to unbalance the world. By hiding it, they were keeping faith. They were preserving light, keeping the radiance of the sun safe from misuse. For the Spaniards, the vanishing treasure was a source of frustration. They had expected chests filled, rooms overflowing, roads lined with wealth. What they found was great, but never enough. Each story of hidden gold drove them to search further, to climb higher, to dig deeper. They imagined mountains full of riches, valleys glittering beneath the soil, caves with walls lined in metal. Their hunger grew, and their searches spread, but the treasure always seemed just beyond their grasp. Over time, the idea of vanishing treasure became legend. It was said that entire caravans of gold had disappeared into the mountains. It was said that priests carried the greatest disk of the sun, so large it could light a chamber by itself, into a secret cave and sealed it with stone. It was said that lakes guarded ornaments shaped like maize fields, llamas, and people, all made of shining gold. The stories were told and retold, each time with new details, each time with the same sense of loss and wonder. Imagine the scene of such a hiding. A group of priests carrying golden objects wrapped in cloth, walking at night along a mountain trail. The moonlight reflects faintly from the metal. The wind moves across the peaks, cool and steady. They reach a cave. They enter one by one, placing the objects carefully inside. A disc leans against the wall. A vessel is set on the ground. A statue is placed in the center. Then stones are carried, stacked, pressed into place until the opening is hidden. The men step back into the night, and the cave becomes part of the mountain once more. The vanishing of treasure is not only about objects, it is also about meaning. What was once displayed openly in temples and plazas became hidden. What was once a symbol of light became a secret. The Incas had given much, but they also kept much. The Spaniards took what they could, but what they could not see remained in silence. The Andes themselves became guardians. Mountains stood like walls. Rivers moved like barriers. Forests grew dense. Paths became overgrown. Entrances crumbled. What was placed in hiding stayed hidden. Nature joined the people in protecting what was sacred. Later explorers would hear these stories and feel a pull. They would imagine themselves finding the hidden chambers, the sealed caves, the golden fields beneath the water. They would draw maps, organize expeditions, march into mountains. Some never returned. Others returned empty-handed. The treasure, if it remained, was not willing to be found. But for the Incas, the hiding was not about adventure or discovery. It was about memory. By concealing the gold, they ensured that it could not be fully taken. That part of their world remained untouched. Even if temples were stripped, even if chambers were filled and emptied, somewhere in the mountains, in the lakes, in the earth, the sun still shone in secret. The vanishing treasure was, in this way, a quiet act of defiance. It was a way of saying that the gods could not be conquered, that the sacred could not be turned into coin, that light could not be fully dimmed. The Spaniards believed they had seized the heart of the empire. The Incas knew they had hidden part of it away. So the story of Inca gold is not only a story of what was given, but also of what was kept. It is not only a story of ransom, but of secrecy. It is not only a story of loss, but of preservation. The treasure vanished into water, into stone, into earth, into legend. And in its vanishing, it became something more than gold. It became a story told again and again, a story that still glimmers quiet and steady in the imagination of those who hear it. As the years passed, the treasure of the Incas became more than gold hidden in mountains or lowered into lakes. It became a story that grew with each telling, a story of entire cities built of gold, of rulers who lived surrounded by light, of places where wealth was endless. These were the legends of lost cities, and the legend of El Dorado. The word El Dorado means the gilded one. At first, it was not about a city, but about a man, a ruler who, according to stories, covered his body in gold dust during a ceremony. He would step into a lake, shining in the morning sun, his skin glowing like a statue come to life. Then he would dive into the water, washing the gold away, leaving it as an offering. Gold dust would drift into the lake, glimmering beneath the surface. To those who heard the story, it sounded like magic, like wealth beyond measure. As the tale spread, the meaning changed. El Dorado became not just a man, but a place. People imagined a city of gold, where every wall shone, where every temple glowed, where streets themselves gleamed with light. Some said it was hidden deep in the forests of South America. Others said it was high in the Andes. Some pointed to lakes, some to valleys, some to mountains. The city's location shifted with each telling, but the dream of it remained. For the Spaniards, who had already seen golden ornaments in Inca temples, the idea of an entire city filled with treasure seemed possible. They had witnessed the ransom of Atahualpa. They had melted discs and statues. They had seen gold carried in baskets along the roads. If such pieces were real, then perhaps the Golden City was real too. And so, expeditions were planned. Men marched into forests where trees grew thick, blocking the sun. They crossed rivers that twisted and widened, their currents strong and unending. They climbed mountains where the air grew thin, where snow gleamed in the distance. At each step, they searched, believing the next valley, the next ridge, the next horizon might reveal the shining city. Yet always it was just beyond reach, always hidden, always waiting. The legend of Paititi grew alongside El Dorado. Paititi was said to be a hidden city in the mountains, where Inca nobles had fled with their treasure. According to stories, when the Spaniards took Cusco and demanded more, some of the Inca elite gathered what they could and left. They carried golden objects, sacred ornaments, and even knowledge itself into a hidden place. They built anew, far from the reach of conquest. Paititi was not only treasure, it was survival. A city of memory waiting in the forest, safe from foreign hands. Imagine a path through thick jungle. Leaves press from every side. Vines hang low. The air is heavy with mist. A line of figures moves slowly, carrying bundles. Within the bundles are discs of gold, ornaments, sacred vessels. Their feet press the earth. Their breathing is steady. They do not look back. They enter deeper into the forest, step by step, until the green closes behind them. Somewhere ahead lies Paititi, the city of refuge, unseen by the outside world. For centuries, people searched for Paititi. Explorers drew maps, some with lines pointing east from Cusco, some with arrows toward the Amazon. Each map carried guesses, each guess carried hope. Expeditions set out, but the forests were vast, the mountains endless, the rivers winding. None returned with proof, yet the stories never faded. The legend of lost cities was more than desire for gold. It was also the pull of the unknown. The Andes and the Amazon seemed endless, filled with places no stranger had walked. It was easy to believe that behind one more ridge, beyond one more river, a hidden city might rest, silent and shining. The Spaniards were not alone in chasing these dreams. Later, explorers from many nations listened to the stories. They wrote them down in books. They told them in courts. They repeated them in taverns. El Dorado became a word that carried both promise and mystery. Paititi became a symbol of what was lost and perhaps still waiting. Each retelling made the cities more vivid, more golden, more complete. And yet, in the quiet of the Andes, the truth was simpler. Gold had been hidden. Yes, objects had been lowered into lakes, buried in caves, carried into forests. But cities of pure gold did not exist. The real cities were of stone, fitted carefully, standing firm against time. Their wealth was not in walls that shone, but in terraces that fed thousands, in roads that stretched for miles, in temples that glowed with light at sunrise. Still, the stories served a purpose. They carried memory. They reminded people that something had been taken, that something had been lost, that something sacred had slipped beyond reach. They gave hope that the balance was not entirely broken, that somewhere, hidden, the light of the sun still rested in metal, untouched. Picture, then, the explorers who searched. A man stands on a ridge, looking out over a green valley. The air is heavy, the forest thick. He imagines golden towers rising from the trees, golden streets winding below. He steps forward, believing that the next path will lead him there. But the valley is only forest, the towers only trees, the streets only roots. He continues, still believing, still searching. The lost cities were never found, but the dream of them remains. In stories told by fires, in books written centuries later, in expeditions that still venture into remote places, the idea of El Dorado and Paititi continues. It is less about treasure now and more about mystery, less about wealth and more about the pull of the unknown. For the Inca people, the legends are a reminder. Gold was once theirs, sacred and steady. Some was taken, some was hidden, some was transformed into stories. The cities of gold may never have existed, but the life that gave rise to the stories was real. Fields, terraces, temples, ceremonies, these were the true treasures, steady and enduring. So the tale of lost cities is not a tale of disappointment. It is a tale of imagination, of memory, of longing. It shows how a people hid what they could, how others dreamed of finding it, how the world continued to wonder. And in the end, perhaps the greatest treasure was not gold at all, but the endurance of the story. A story that glimmers like light on water, never fully in hand, never fully gone, always waiting, always just beyond reach. After stories of treasure and vanished cities, it is steadying to return to the ordinary, to the small detail of daily life that gave the Inca world its rhythm. Gold may have glimmered in temples and in legends, but life itself was shaped more by fields, by homes, by families, by the patterns that repeated day after day. Morning in a village began with light falling across stone walls. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting long shadows across terraces and paths. Families woke to the sound of animals stirring, to the faint call of birds, to the crackle of a fire being lit. A pot was placed on the hearth, maize porridge simmering quietly as the day began. Children rubbed their eyes, pulling woolen cloth around their shoulders. Elders stretched stiff joints, leaning on wooden staffs as they stepped into the morning air. The terraces waited. Carved into the hillsides, they stood like stairways reaching toward the sky. Farmers carried tools of wood and bronze, stepping carefully along the stone paths that divided the fields. Water flowed in channels, guided by stones, trickling steadily from mountain springs. Seeds were pressed into soil, weeds pulled, young shoots tended. Each task was simple, yet each was repeated with patience. Row by row, terrace by terrace, the work continued, not hurried, not delayed, but steady. Llamas and alpacas moved among the people. Some carried bundles, their soft hooves sure on the rocky ground. Others grazed in small pastures, their wool growing thick. The animals were companions as well as workers, steady presences in the villages. When the bells on their necks rang softly, it was like a gentle music drifting through the air. Weaving was constant too. Women sat on low stools, their looms stretched across wooden frames or tied between poles. They spun yarn from alpaca wool, twisting it between fingers, winding it into balls, then stretching it into threads. The shuttle passed back and forth, thread crossing thread, colors forming patterns. The process was unhurried, and the sound of the loom was steady, like a heartbeat. Blankets grew row by row, carrying zigzags for mountains, diamonds for the sun, stripes for rivers. Each piece was useful, a cloak, a wrap, a bag, but each was also beautiful, carrying meaning in its shapes. In the markets, life unfolded in calm gatherings. Villagers brought baskets of potatoes, peppers, beans, and maize. They set them down on mats or cloths, arranging them in neat piles. Others displayed woven goods, carved tools, clay pots. There was no money exchanged. Trade was done through barter: maize for cloth, salt for beans, wool for fish. Words were spoken, hands gestured, exchanges made. The market was not loud, but it was full of quiet motion, a hum of voices, a flow of goods. Festivals brought another rhythm. In plazas, people gathered in larger circles. Drums sounded with slow, deep beats. Flutes lifted their notes, rising and falling like the wind. Dancers moved in step, repeating patterns of motion, lifting arms, turning slowly, lowering arms again. Offerings were placed on altars, maize beer poured into the earth, coca leaves set in small piles, cloth laid neatly before a shrine. Priests lifted golden vessels, their surfaces reflecting the firelight. The crowd joined in song, voices rising and falling together. These ceremonies did not hurry. They stretched across hours, each act repeated, each gesture familiar. At home, evenings were calm. Families gathered near the hearth, the flames flickering against stone walls. Clay pots simmered with stews of potatoes or maize. Children leaned against their parents, listening to stories told by elders. The stories spoke of ancestors, of gods, of mountains that walked, of rivers that sang. Shadows shifted on the walls. The smell of smoke filled the air. The warmth of the fire pressed against the cool of the mountain night. Sleep came early. Beds were simple, mats or blankets spread across the floor. Outside, stars filled the sky, sharp and countless in the thin air. Dogs barked faintly in the distance. Llamas stirred softly, and the wind moved across the valleys. The world grew quiet, wrapped in darkness, steady until morning light returned. The empire itself moved with this same rhythm. Roads stretched across mountains, runners carried messages, storehouses were filled, armies marched when needed. Yet beneath it all was the daily life of villages, repeating in quiet cycles. Each terrace planted, each loom worked, each market gathered. The greatness of the Inca world rested not only in its rulers or temples, but in its people, in their patient hands, in their steady steps. Gold was present, yes, but always as part of something larger. A golden ornament shone during a festival, then returned to its place. A golden disk reflected sunlight in a temple, then rested through the night. The people themselves lived mostly without it, their wealth measured in food, in cloth, in family, in the health of their herds. It is this daily life, calm and enduring, that gave the empire its strength. When we return to these scenes, to a farmer planting maize, to a woman weaving thread, to children playing with small clay toys, we see the heart of the Inca world. We see not the rush of conquest, not the glitter of treasure, but the slow, steady pulse of a people living in balance with the land. The Andes gave challenges, steep slopes, thin air, cold nights, but the Andes also gave gifts, fertile valleys, flowing rivers, stones strong enough to build with. The Incas accepted both, shaping their lives with patience, creating a world that endured. So in this chapter, we rest again with the ordinary. We step back from legends of El Dorado, from vanished hordes, from treasure hidden in lakes and mountains. We sit by a fire. We walk through a market. We follow a farmer along a terrace. We hear the drumbeat of festivals. We see the glow of torches on golden vessels. We feel the cool wind moving across a mountain slope. The story of Inca gold does not end with treasure taken or treasure hidden. It continues, carried forward not only in objects, but in memory. long after the chambers were emptied, long after the lakes swallowed their secrets, long after the forests closed around hidden paths, the story itself remained. And the story has its own kind of glow. In Spain, ships returned across the ocean carrying gold melted into bars. It was placed in chests, weighed, recorded, and delivered to kings and nobles. To them, it was wealth, power, the measure of an empire reaching across seas. But for the Inca world, that gold had been something else, an offering, a reflection, a connection to the sun. Melted and reshaped, it lost its sacredness, yet in memory, it continued to shine. In Peru, the people remembered. They remembered temples covered in golden plates, glowing in the morning sun. They remembered ceremonies where vessels caught the firelight, where priests lifted ornaments with reverence. They remembered the ransom of Atahualpa, the room filled to the line of his hand. They remembered the hidden treasures carried into mountains, lowered into lakes, sealed into caves. Even when the objects were gone, the stories remained. And those stories became part of the land itself. When people looked at Lake Titicaca, they did not see only water. They saw the possibility of golden ornaments resting in the depths. When they looked at the Langanates Mountains, they did not see only ridges and slopes. They imagined caves filled with treasure sealed away. When they walked through Cusco and saw the stones of old temples, they remembered walls once covered in gold. The land carried the stories, and the stories carried light. For explorers from outside, the stories became dreams. They imagined El Dorado, the city of gold, shining in some hidden valley. They imagined Paititi, safe in the forests, still glowing with treasure. They imagined that one more journey, one more map, one more expedition would uncover the lost wealth. The legends spread across Europe, across centuries, filling books, filling conversations, filling imaginations. But the true legacy was not in lost cities. It was in the endurance of the people and their culture. The Inca Empire fell, but its memory did not. The terraces remain on mountain slopes, still holding soil, still feeding crops. The roads remain. Some still walk today, stretching across valleys, linking towns. The stones remain, fitted so precisely that time and earthquakes could not break them. These were the true treasures, not easily taken, not easily melted, not easily forgotten. The music remains too. Flutes and drums are still played in Andean villages, their notes rising into the thin air. Dancers still move in circles during festivals, repeating patterns as their ancestors did. Cloth is still woven, with patterns of mountains, rivers, and the sun, the same symbols carried forward thread by thread. In these acts, ordinary and enduring, the spirit of the Inca lives on. The gold itself, much of it, is gone. Some rests in museums, behind glass, its glow still soft in the light. Some rests in Europe, melted long ago into coins and crowns. Some may still lie in lakes, in caves, in mountains, unseen. But whether found or lost, whether displayed or imagined, it has already given its greatest gift. It has carried the story forward. The legacy of Inca gold is not about wealth, but about memory. It is about the way people speak of it, the way they imagine it, the way they tell its story again and again. Each retelling is like the reflection of light on water. Not the light itself, but something that carries it forward, softly, steadily. And so we reach the end of this quiet journey. We have walked along terraces, we have sat by fires, we have stepped into temples where golden discs caught the sun. We have followed messengers along roads, we have listened to legends of hidden cities. We have watched treasure vanish into mountains and lakes. We have returned to daily life, to weaving and farming, to festivals and markets. We have rested in the ordinary, and we have glimmered in the extraordinary. Now, at the end, we sit quietly with the legacy itself, a story that glows, even when the gold is gone, a story that endures, even when centuries pass, a story that reminds us of the patience of people, the power of belief, the endurance of culture. The Andes still stand, the rivers still flow, the terraces still step upward toward the sky, and in these, the true treasure remains, steady, patient, enduring. The Incas may have lost their gold, but they did not lose their memory. And memory, like light, cannot be taken. It only reflects softly from one generation to the next. So, the story rests here. Not with a chest of treasure found, not with a city of gold uncovered, but with the quiet endurance of a people and their land. That is the legacy of Inca gold, a glow that continues calm and steady in the mind, in the heart, in the soft telling of a story. And so, the story of Inca gold rests here, not only in treasure taken or treasure hidden, but in memory, in culture, in the rhythm of daily life. The Andes still stand, the rivers still flow, the terraces still climb toward the sky. The Inca world endures, not only in legends of lost cities, but in the patience of people, the strength of stone, and the glow of memory. As you rest now, let these images soften. Golden discs shining in the sun, terraces stepping up mountainsides, flutes and drums echoing across plazas, quiet fires glowing at night. All of it calm, steady, unhurried. Even after the story ends, the Andes remain. The mountains stand quietly, their ridges softened by distance, their peaks touched by snow. The valleys lie between them, green in the sunlight, silver in the moonlight. And through these places, the memory of the Inca lingers. Walk slowly along a mountain path. The air is thin, but it is clear. You hear the crunch of stones beneath your sandals, the rustle of grass in the wind, the faint sound of water flowing down a channel. Each sound is simple, yet each repeats, steady and familiar. It is in such moments that the past feels close. Look to the terraces. They rise one above another, climbing the slopes. Even when they are empty of crops, they remain, stone upon stone, fitted with care, holding the earth steady. Each terrace is like a line of memory, repeating the patience of those who built them. The terraces do not hurry, they do not fade. They wait in silence, carrying the past into the present. In the distance, llamas move across the hillside. Their pace is slow, their steps sure. The bells around their necks chime softly, a rhythm against the mountain air. They have carried burdens for centuries, and they carry memory as well. Memory of paths long walked, of traders, of priests, of farmers. To watch them is to see continuity, a thread unbroken. In the evening, the sky deepens. The stars appear, one by one, until the heavens are full. The same stars the Incas once watched. The same constellations they gave names to. The same patterns they used to guide their planting, their festivals, their journeys. The Milky Way stretches above, clear and white. To the Inca, it was a river flowing across the sky, reflecting the rivers below. As you lie back and gaze upward, you feel that river flowing still, a link between past and present. Gold is not in sight here. There are no discs, no vessels, no ornaments, but there is still light, the light of stars, the glow of the moon, the shimmer of water moving in the dark. This light, too, is sacred, though it is not held in metal. It is free, it is endless, it is gentle. The wind moves through the valleys. It carries with it whispers, not of treasure, but of voices. Voices of people telling stories by fires. Voices of children laughing as they chase one another on stone paths. Voices of weavers humming as they pass the shuttle back and forth. The whispers drift, faint but steady, as though the mountains themselves keep them safe. You might think of the legends of El Dorado, of Paititi, of vanished treasure hidden in lakes and caves. But in this chapter, those legends fade into quiet. What remains is not the search for gold, but the calm presence of the land. The mountains, the rivers, the stars, the terraces, the llamas, the villages, all of it steady, all of it enduring. Even the stones of Cusco, fitted so carefully, speak softly of time. Hands shaped them, placed them, pressed them into walls that still stand. When you touch them, you feel their cool surface, smooth from centuries of wind and rain. They do not rush to tell their story. They simply endure, waiting for those who notice. The Andes themselves are like that. Vast, patient, watching. They have seen empires rise and fall, have heard the footsteps of messengers, the clatter of hooves, the voices of conquerors, the songs of villagers. Through it all, they remain steady, and within them the story of the Inca rests, not gone, not lost, but quiet. So we end, not with treasure found, but with silence, not with conquest, but with continuity. The Inca gold may be hidden, melted, taken, or remembered, but the true wealth remains in the terraces, in the stars, in the stories still told. As you rest now, let the Andes settle in your imagination. Picture the ridges stretching across the horizon. Picture the terraces stepping upward, neat and calm. Picture the stars above, countless and steady. Let the mountains hold you, the rivers soothe you, the whispers drift around you. There is no need to seek treasure. There is only the quiet glow of memory. The story of Inca gold is long. It began in the sun. It passed through temples. It moved along roads. It was hidden in mountains. It glimmered in legends. Now it rests, softly, in reflection. And so too may you rest. The mountains are steady. The stars are bright. The world is calm. The story is complete, and you are free to sleep. Time, like a river, moves quietly. It does not hurry, and it does not stop. It flows past mountains, past terraces, past cities. It flows through the lives of people, carrying their days into memory. And in the story of the Inca, time flows still. Picture the river that runs through a valley in the Andes. The water is cold, drawn from melting snow high above. It slides over stones, it curves around bends, it deepens in pools, it widens across flats. The sound is steady, a ripple, a splash, a soft rush. Day after day the river moves, changing its surface, yet always the same in essence. The Inca people watched rivers closely. They guided them into channels. They built canals to feed their terraces. They placed stones to steady the flow. And in doing so, they treated water not only as need, but as presence. To them, water was life, and life was time. Both were steady. Both were patient. Both could never be fully held. Think now of time as a loom. Threads are stretched, taut and waiting. One by one, another thread is passed through, over and under, back and forth. The weaver's hands move slowly, repeating motions without haste. The cloth grows row by row until a pattern appears. Time is like that. One moment crossing another, one day woven to the next. The result is not seen at once, but it comes quietly, until the whole is revealed. The Inca world was shaped by this sense of time. Festivals came with the turning of the sun. Planting followed the seasons. Harvest followed the rains. Each year repeated, yet each year was new. It was not a line rushing forward, but a circle, patient and repeating. Gold, too, was part of this circle. It caught the sunlight of one day, then the next, then the next. It did not grow old. It reflected time without being touched by it. In this way, gold was eternal, a steady reminder that the sun always returned, that life continued, that memory endured. Now imagine yourself sitting beside a fire in a highland village. The flames rise and fall, sparks drifting upward into the night. Around you, people speak in low voices. Some tell stories of ancestors, some hum softly, some simply sit in silence. The fire is warm, the air is cool, the stars are bright above. Time itself seems to pause, holding the moment gently. It is in such moments that memory gathers, not in dramatic events, not in sudden changes, but in quiet evenings, in steady work, in repeated patterns. The Inca gold we have spoken of shines in history, but the true treasure lies in the flow of time itself, in the way life was lived, carefully, patiently, together. As you listen now, you may feel your own time slowing. Breath by breath, word by word, the minutes lengthen. There is no rush. The story moves, but gently. It carries you along, as the river carries leaves, as the loom carries threads, as the fire carries sparks into the night. Think of the mountains again. They have stood through centuries. They have seen rivers change course, forests grow and shrink, people come and go. Yet they remain, patient and steady. Time flows around them, but they endure. They are like memory itself, vast, quiet, watching. In the flow of time, treasures vanish and treasures remain. Gold may be hidden, melted, taken, or forgotten. But the flow continues, carrying with it the essence of what matters most: work, family, faith, balance. These things last, even when objects do not. And so, as this chapter draws on, we rest with time itself. We do not chase it, we do not hold it, we do not fear it. We simply sit with it like sitting beside a river, or beside a loom, or beside a fire. It moves and we move with it. It glows and we glow with it. It rests and we rest with it. This is the flow of time. It carries the Inca story. It carries the gold. It carries the memory of lives lived in patience. And it carries you too, softly forward, into rest, into sleep. Though centuries have passed since the time of the Inca, the Andes remain, and with them echoes of the world that once was. The empire has fallen, the temples have changed, the gold has been scattered or lost. Yet in the high valleys, in the mountain villages, pieces of Inca life continue. They endure quietly, not in the gleam of treasure, but in the steady rhythm of daily living. The terraces still hold their shape. Walk along the slopes outside Cusco and you will see them, step after step, rising against the mountainsides. Some are still planted with maize, potatoes, quinoa. The stones are weathered, yet firm. The earth between them is dark and fertile. When farmers bend to place seed, their movements are not unlike those of their ancestors. The same sun warms the soil, the same winds move across the ridges. The same patience is needed for crops to grow. Water still flows through ancient channels. Some have been repaired, some remain untouched. Yet the sound of trickling streams is the same. Guided by stone, the water runs evenly, feeding terraces, filling troughs, moving always downward. Children sometimes play beside the channels, their hands dipping into the cool current. The water laughs against the rocks, a soft reminder that the systems of the Inca were built not just for their own time, but for ages to come. The weaving continues too. In villages high in the Andes, women sit with looms stretched before them, spinning threads of alpaca wool. They weave with colors drawn from plants and minerals, deep reds, soft yellows, quiet blues. The patterns echo the mountains, the rivers, the sun, the stars. Each design has been passed down, taught by mother to daughter, aunt to niece, elder to child. The rhythm of weaving is slow, steady, soothing. It is the same rhythm that filled Inca homes centuries ago, a rhythm that binds generations together. Festivals still bring people to plazas. The instruments are much the same. Flutes carved from bone or cane, drums stretched with hide, rattles made from gourds. The music rises into the thin air high and clear, repeating ancient tones. Dancers step in circles, their feet moving in patterns known long ago. Their arms rise, their heads bow, their motions honor both the earth and the sky. The plaza fills with color, with sound, with the memory of ceremonies once performed for the sun. Stories are still told at night. Around fires, in kitchens, in doorways, elders speak to children. They tell of Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, the first children of the sun. They tell of mountains that walk, of rivers that sing, of stars that guide. The children listen with wide eyes, watching the flames as shadows dance against the walls. The stories repeat, generation after generation, never hurried, never forgotten. They are the true gold of the people, light carried not in metal, but in memory. The stones of the old temples remain as well. In Cusco, at the site of the Coricancha, the walls still stand. The golden plates are gone, the ornaments are gone, but the stones endure. Each block is cut and fitted so precisely that even after earthquakes, they hold. Tourists walk beside them now, running fingers along their smooth edges, marveling at their strength. But for the people of the Andes, these walls are not only marvels, they are reminders. Reminders of what once was, reminders of the patience of their ancestors, reminders of a time when gold glowed like sunlight on stone. The language of the Inca Quechua is still spoken. In villages, in markets, on mountain roads, its syllables rise and fall with the same cadence heard centuries ago. Children learn it at home, repeating words after their parents. Songs are sung in Quechua, prayers spoken, greetings exchanged. It is a language that has carried memory across time, steady and enduring. Even as Spanish became the language of rulers, Quechua remained the language of families, the language of the heart. In this way, the legacy of the Inca is not only in gold or in stone. It is in terraces that still feed, in looms that still weave, in songs that still echo, in stories that still glow by firelight. It is in the lives of people who rise each morning, walk mountain paths, and repeat the patterns of their ancestors. When travelers stand in the Andes today, they sometimes imagine the past as gone. But if they listen closely, they will hear it, in the sound of water flowing in channels, in the call of a flute during a festival, in the words of a story told by an elder to a child. The past is not silent. It whispers gently, steady as breath, through the lives of the present. So, Chapter 11 rests not in treasure found or treasure hidden, but in treasure lived, in the quiet persistence of culture, in the endurance of memory, in the small details that repeat, unbroken, across centuries. The Andes still hold the echoes. The people still carry the light. The gold of the Inca glimmers not only in metal, but in every act of life that continues, softly, steadily, to this day. The empire has passed. The rulers are gone. The golden ornaments no longer rest on temple walls. And yet, the Andes remain full of quiet continuation. The stones, the fields, the songs, the tastes of food, all carry forward pieces of the world that was once the Incas. To walk through the mountains today is to walk beside history that never fully left. Consider the roads. The Inca built thousands of miles of stone paths, stretching across valleys, climbing ridges, crossing rivers. They were used by runners carrying messages, by caravans of llamas, by armies on the march. Even now, many of those paths remain, Hikers follow them step by step, boots pressing into the same stones that once carried sandals. The roads are narrow, but strong. They cut across slopes with patience, never hurrying, always steady. Every turn, every bridge, every stair reminds us of the hands that built them and the feet that once walked them. Consider the ruins. Machu Picchu rests high above a valley wrapped in clouds. Its walls rise from terraces, its stairways climb toward temples, its stones fitted as if grown from the mountain itself. Though it lay hidden for centuries, when it was revealed again, it felt less like discovery and more like remembering. Visitors walk slowly through its passages, touching the stones, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of time. Machu Picchu is not the only sight. There are many: Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman, Pisac. Each ruin carries its own quiet strength. Each ruin repeats the same lesson, that patience can outlast centuries. Consider the food. The potatoes of the Andes come in countless varieties, each one shaped by soil and altitude. Quinoa grows in high fields, its tiny seeds carried in baskets, cooked into meals. Chicha, the drink of maize, is still made, still shared, still lifted in offering during festivals. To taste these foods is to share with the past, to repeat what was once ordinary, what remains ordinary still. The meals are simple, yet filling, calm, yet rich with memory. Consider the festivals. They fill plazas with dancers and music, not only for tourists, but for the people themselves. The Inti Raymi Festival of the Sun is still held each year in Cusco. Priests in golden robes stand before crowds, raising vessels, repeating rituals once spoken in temples. The sun is honored again, as it was long ago. Children watch, elders remember, travelers marvel. The festival is not a perfect copy of the past, but it carries the same light, the same rhythm, the same devotion to the world above and the earth below. Even the language continues. Quechua phrases fill the air in mountain villages, in markets, in homes. The syllables rise and fall with the same cadence spoken in the courts of the Inca. Songs are sung in Quechua, lullabies for children, chants for work, prayers for harvest. It is a language of endurance, not hurried, not silenced, but carried softly through generations. The people of the Andes carry this continuation in their faces, their clothing, their voices. Woolen garments woven with bright patterns are worn as they walk along stone paths. Hats shaped for sun and wind tilt against the sky. Bundles are carried on backs fastened with cloth wrapped in careful knots. Each step, each gesture, echoes the lives of those before. And beneath it all, the mountains remain the greatest guardians. The Andes are high, cold, and vast. They have seen empires rise. They have seen conquerors arrive. They have seen centuries unfold. Yet they continue, unmoved, patient. Snow rests on their peaks. Rivers cut their valleys. Clouds gather at their slopes. The people who live among them are shaped by them, steady as stone, enduring as shadow. In this way, the story of the Inca does not truly end. It lingers in terraces that still feed families. It lingers in roads that still carry travelers. It lingers in ruins that still hold their shape. It lingers in festivals, in foods, in songs, in languages. And it lingers in memory, not only in Peru, not only in the Andes, but around the world, wherever the story of Inca gold is told. So, Chapter 12 rests here, not in endings, but in continuations. The empire is gone, but its rhythm remains. The gold is scattered, but its meaning endures. The people are changed, but their lives still echo the past. The Andes hold all of it: the patience, the memory, the light, steady and silent, waiting for us to notice. When the Spaniards came to the Andes, they carried not only swords and muskets, but also pens. They wrote in journals, in letters, in reports meant for kings and courts across the sea. They described what they saw, what they believed, what they hoped to claim. And in those words, another story of Inca gold was formed. The chroniclers noticed the ornaments first. They wrote of golden discs in temples shining with morning sunlight. They wrote of statues, llamas, maize stalks, human figures, all fashioned from the sacred metal. They wrote of walls lined with hammered sheets, of vessels used in ceremonies, of jewelry worn by priests and nobles. Their words lingered on detail after detail, as though each glimmer of light were proof of fortune. But they did not always understand. To the Incas, gold was sacred, a reflection of the sun. To the Spaniards, gold was wealth, a source of armies, of power, of crowns. When a chronicler described a statue of a llama, he wrote of its weight, its value, its price if melted. When the Inca priest looked at the same statue, he saw an offering, a prayer, a symbol of life. The words on the page carried one meaning, but behind the object was another. Some chronicles were full of wonder. The writers marveled at the roads, the terraces, the order of the empire. They wrote of cities clean and precise, of storehouses filled with food, of armies disciplined and strong. But again and again, their ink returned to the glow of gold. It was as though the sacred metal pulled their eyes back, always back, until they could see little else. They also wrote of the ransom of Atahualpa. They described the chamber, the line on the wall, the piles of ornaments carried from distant temples. Their words measured not prayers or sacrifices, but cargo. So many plates, so many vessels, so many statues. They wrote of how the metal was melted, divided, distributed among the conquerors. Their records were careful, full of numbers, but empty of reverence. What was sacred became inventory. The priests among them wrote differently. They described the rituals, the festivals, the offerings. They condemned them as idolatry, yet they recorded them in detail. They wrote of dancers in plazas, of flutes and drums, of coca leaves scattered in offering, of maize beer poured to the earth. In their words, there is both criticism and fascination, a sense that the faith of the Andes was powerful, even if they sought to replace it. The chronicles also carried exaggeration. Stories grew as they traveled. Golden gardens became more vivid with each telling. A single ornament became a field. A temple wall became an entire city. The glow of truth was mixed with the fire of imagination, until Europe believed in endless wealth waiting beyond the seas. It was from these pages that the legend of El Dorado grew, not only from memory but from ink. And yet, within the exaggerations, there were truths. The Spaniards did see walls lined with sheets of gold. They did walk through chambers filled with treasure. They did watch priests lift golden vessels during ceremonies. Their words preserve what their eyes saw, even if their hearts misunderstood. Without those chronicles, much would have been forgotten. Because of them, details remain, even if seen through foreign eyes. Imagine a chronicler at his desk. By candlelight, he dips his quill into ink. He writes of a temple in Cusco, its walls glowing, its statues gleaming. He writes of a ransom chamber, full to the marked line. He writes of mountains where treasure might be hidden, of lakes that might hold offerings. Outside, the Andes are dark, silent, eternal. Inside, his words take shape, carrying the story across an ocean. These chronicles were read in Spain, in courts and in cities. They stirred imaginations. They fueled expeditions. They shaped how the world saw the Andes. The Inca world was described not only by its people, but by those who conquered it. And so, memory became mixed, half sacred, half greedy, half wonder, half misunderstanding. Today, those chronicles remain in libraries. Their pages are faded, their ink softened by centuries. Scholars read them carefully, line by line, searching for what is true, setting aside what is rumor. The words of conquerors are not the same as the voices of the conquered, yet they still carry echoes of what once was. So, Chapter 13 rests in these pages, in the careful lines of ink, in the steady hand of a scribe, in the gap between what was seen and what was understood. The chronicles are not gold, yet they shine in their own way. They preserve memory even as they distort it. They remind us that history is not only lived, but written, and that what is written carries both truth and shadow. Long after the Spaniards had carried away what they could, and long after the ransom of Atahualpa had been melted into bars, others came, still searching. The story of Inca gold had taken root in the imagination of the world, and wherever the story traveled, so too did the dream of discovery. Explorers set out into the Andes with maps in hand. Some maps were copied from old chronicles. Some were drawn from memory, with lines leading toward mountains or lakes. Some were little more than rumor, sketched on scraps of paper, passed from hand to hand. Each map promised treasure, and each map carried more hope than certainty. The Langanates Mountains were searched again and again. It was said that Atahualpa's ransom, or part of it, had been carried there and hidden. Men climbed the slopes, cut paths through forests, camped in valleys where fog drifted low. They dug into caves. They sifted through stones. They listened for whispers of gold. But the mountains kept their secrets. What was hidden remained hidden, as though the earth itself had chosen silence. Lake Titicaca, too, was a place of searching. Divers entered its cold waters, carrying lines, carrying weights, carrying the hope of treasure. They returned with stories of seeing glimmers, of touching objects buried in silt, but never with the golden fields of legend. The lake stretched wide and calm, holding what it wished, offering nothing more than reflection. Archaeologists in later centuries took a different path. They studied ruins, measured stones, traced roads. Their interest was less in treasure than in knowledge. They uncovered pottery, tools, textiles, fragments of lives once lived. Each discovery was small, yet each one carried meaning. Not gold, perhaps, but wealth of another kind. The wealth of understanding, of memory, of connection to the past. Travelers came too. They walked the terraces. They visited Cusco. They gazed upon Machu Picchu. They felt the silence of the Andes, and they wondered about the gold. Even when none was found, the dream of it seemed to hang in the air. It was not only an object now, but an idea. An idea that shimmered softly, like sunlight on stone. In this way, the search never ended. Not because gold was waiting to be uncovered, but because the story itself was treasure. Each expedition, each rumor, each quiet discovery added another thread to the cloth. The legend of Inca gold became a legend not of wealth, but of wonder. And so we come to the end of our telling. From the sacred temples of the Inca, to the ransom chamber of Cajamarca, to the hidden lakes and mountains, to the maps and expeditions of later centuries, the story has flowed, steady and unhurried. It has glimmered in metal, in memory, in imagination. It has lingered in terraces still planted, in songs still sung, in language still spoken. The true treasure was never only the gold. It was the patience of the people, the strength of the stones, the rhythm of daily life, the endurance of memory. These things remain even now as the Andes watch quietly over valleys and rivers. As you rest, think of the mountains, think of the terraces, step upon step. Think of the rivers, flowing slowly. Think of the stars, glimmering in the night sky. The gold may be gone, but the story is here, And the story is enough. The search has ended. The telling has ended. The night continues. And you may close your eyes and drift softly into sleep. The story is complete. You may let go of it now and drift into sleep.